But the interesting thing about ageing is, of course, the diseases that we're seeing as the top 5 killers in Australia, all your chances of getting them increase significantly, and in some cases exponentially, as you get older. And I'll show you the connection between some of these and this process, which then leads into this. So how does lifestyle affect health? As I said, it's going to have a little bit of science, and there's 2 things that I'll do. So I've shortened this. I was asked to give a seminar similar to this a couple of weeks ago, and they wanted 3 hours of it. Very enthusiastic, I know. There won't be that. I'm going to try and finish in an hour today. I'm going to try and put 2 sessions in an hour. So I've left out quite a bit. But after the first session, so the first session I want to talk about this free radical causes of aging and lifestyle diseases. Who's heard of free radicals? Almost everybody. Okay, you'll get to see what that means in a little bit more detail. So the first one is the free radicals, and then the second one is how can you reduce free radicals in lifestyle. And then I'm going to finish off, and it's pretty much only the last slide, which will have the 8 laws of health. And I want to just actually point out how the 8 laws of health link in with what we're seeing here as a reduction in this free radical. So after the first session, you'll be able to ask some questions, and then we'll again after the second session. And if there is any burning question, or particularly if there's anything that needs clarification as we're going along, please, I was going to say call out, but you can put your hand up and we'll do it in a sort of orderly way. But if you can wait until the end of the session, that would be okay as well. Is that all right? Okay. So what are the main points that I want to get across in this first session? So free radicals cause what's called oxidative stress. Now I'm going to get you to repeat it out to me. What does it cause? Oxidative stress. So we all hear about stress and we all feel stressed, and that's the body stressing. But this is actually free radicals causing oxidative stress, or stress to the cells themselves. Now I'm going to use those 2 terms interchangeably. So if you hear me talk about oxidative stress, I'm meaning what? Free radicals. And if you hear me talk about free radicals, I'm meaning oxidative stress. So okay, it's important to use those 2 because I tend to forget, and my wife thinks that I don't clarify things enough sometimes. So absolutely. I'll tell you first. So as one of the first things. So we'll get to that one. And then this oxidative stress, or free radicals, causes damage to the cells that result in aging and disease. And I want to show you all the things that we've been given. This is some fairly advanced science, and at one point here I'm going to flesh out a theory that you, amongst a very select other few, except for where I've given the lecture, at places like Bankstown Hospital, University of New South Wales, and a couple of other places, but this is actually quite new in terms of how it relates. But I hope it makes sense so that you understand what is actually the cause behind disease. And then you can make intelligent decisions as to what choices you make for disease. So, aging and disease related to oxidative stress. So what happens when we age? Yep, what happens when we age is we get much wiser. And that's a good thing. So they're wisdom lines, and all of you should be looking forward to that. However, one of the other things that come with aging is unfortunately what seems to be, at least in some of the processes and certainly in some of the organs of the body, would be considered a degeneration. Because things don't work quite as well. Why is it? You know, this is a little bit of science to start off with. You know that every person, all the cells that you have in the body, what happens if you rub the back of your hand? Can somebody tell me what happens? Cells come off, don't they? And then what happens? New cells grow underneath, don't they? And if you do the same thing, you know, even as you eat, you rub some of the things from the gut away. You can do the same sort of thing in the eye. Virtually every cell in the body, even in the brain, but to a less extent, your cells are turning over all of the time, aren't they? You're making new ones to replace the old ones. The old ones get old and they die. Why don't the old ones, the new ones, look the same as the old ones? Yeah, if they looked exactly the same, in other words, the genetic material that's contained in each cell, if it were able to reproduce itself exactly the same each time, you would be 70 years old looking the same as this. But because each time it gathers a little bit of damage, and gathers a little bit of damage, and gathers a little bit of damage. And so unfortunately, the next one is just not quite as good as the one before. And then the next one is just not quite as good as the one before. Now you can accelerate that process or you can retard that process. I'm going to show you what that means. So here you can see it more obviously in the skin. That's the body's biggest organ. But it happens the same for the heart, the same for the gut, the same for the liver, the same for every organ and every tissue within the body. There's this theory, oxygen and other free radicals, all right, so oxidative stress, cause accumulative oxidative damage or damage, resulting in structural degeneration. This is kind of technical terms. I won't tell you what that one is, but functional decline and age-related diseases. So basically, free radicals are causing damage to lots of structures, the proteins, the fats, etc., but particularly to the nucleus, the damage in the DNA. And once it starts damaging that, and it's not repaired, because the body's got great ways of repairing it, if it's not repaired, then the next cell is going to look a little bit worse than the one before, and the next one a little bit worse than the one before, etc. All right, so the greatest risk factor for lifestyle disease is age, and the greatest, or this is the most comprehensive theory for aging is this free radical theory of aging. So the more free radicals you have, what do you end up with? The more damage you have, and therefore aging faster. Does that make sense? All right. Here's a free radical. All a free and you've all heard of free radicals because I asked you that question. But what is a free radical? A free radical is just a molecule. There's a few different types. I won't tell you all the different types. But it's a molecule that doesn't have a paired electron. Now, for those who's doing chemistry, is anybody doing biology or chemistry in school at the moment? I'm getting nobody. Science? Okay. So you've seen the cells. Most of you have seen what an element is, an atom. This is just an atom. And you know that there's the atoms, the electrons that spin around the outside. So inside is the protons, and that spin around the outside is the electrons. This is the only bit of chemistry I'm going to do here. But they spin around the outside. They like to spin around in pairs. A little bit like humans, we like to exist as pairs. And when it doesn't have a pair, and it's only got one left, it's going to go and try and find something that it can get paired up with. And that's why they can become a little bit destructive. I don't want to go too far here with the social analogy of having sort of lone rogue males around, but it's a bit the same, and particularly if they've got no morals, they can be very destructive, can't they, in cohesive societies. It's exactly the same with a free radical. You know, this is the chemistry equivalent of a rogue male with no morals. They need an extra electron, so they'll bang into anything to try and they'll rip electrons off anything. So it can be in the nucleus, it can be in the membrane of the cell, it can be in different functional parts of the cell, but it's particularly the ones that happen in the nucleus. Is that okay? Is any questions about that one? All right, so it hasn't got its extra paired electron, so it's going to bang into whatever it can to make sure it can rip off an electron, and that causes destruction. It actually breaks apart the nucleus. You've heard of the double helix in DNA. Well, it'll break parts of that all over it, and the body has to work very hard to repair it. But that's what free radicals do, and free radicals happen as a result of, well, I'll show you in a little while. So where do free radicals come from? So free radicals are a problem. Free radicals seem to be causing aging and all the diseases which we can see the Adventist lifestyle seems to help prevent. But what are they causing? Well, I'm going to talk about this one more later on, but the conversion of the food we eat, calories or kilojoules, into the body's energy. Now it's called ATP, we don't have to remember that, but it's basically the body's energy. And that actually is the main source. I'm going to talk about it in a little bit more detail in the second session. So I'm going to leave a little bit of that here. But that's actually our main source when we convert the food we eat, particularly the high calories, into energy. Other metabolic activities, so there's a number of things that go on in the body which do produce free radicals, and we've got to be able to mop them up. The body's got good ways of doing that. The immune system, so anytime we have inflammation. Now, is inflammation a good thing? Yeah, I know exactly what you mean, and first thought is, no, it's not good for you. But of course, it is good for you if you've got an infection or something like that, and you need the immune system activated so that you can deal with the damage. But notice what's happening when you have the if you get infected with, say, a virus. It's coming up winter time, Some of us will get sort of dry mucous membranes, and then the virus have more chance of being able to infect things like the throat, and you might get a bacterial infection on top of it. You get inflammation, which is going to cause you to have a bit of a sore throat, etc. But inside there you get a lot of white cells producing and they actually produce a lot of free radicals. You know why? Because they're trying to kill the bacteria and the viruses, which makes sense. That's why they produce things like superoxide, hydrogen peroxide. Has anybody heard of hydrogen peroxide? Yep, yeah. We're all natural blondes, but it's used for that kind of thing. Hypochlorous acid, some of you might have bleached things with things like that. And the immune cells produce that sort of thing. They are themselves free radicals. And then there is this external source, the food we eat. Now there's one interesting one called AGEs. I'll talk a little bit more about later. It's called advanced glycation end products. I just like the term AGEs because AGEs does age you. And I'll show you where that comes from. Chemical pollutants, well, you can guess where those sort of things come from, pesticides, etc. Then you've got the air, sort of environmental pollutants, industrial, motor wastes. I see these people jogging along, particularly in the city. And exercise is a great thing. The trouble is, if you've ever jogged or walked out in the bush somewhere early in the morning and you're just enjoying the day, jogging along, whatever, and then a car goes past, you can hardly breathe. Now, that's one car going past in a very big open space. You can imagine how much of that exhausts your breathing if you're jogging along a major highway. Some of us can't avoid it, and if you're living by there, then it's probably better still to exercise than not. But there are certainly a lot of pollutants, motor waste and industrial pollutants we get. Then there's also this ionising radiation, which comes from, the solar radiation, etc. We've also got a little bit in rocks and stuff around us. Then there's this non-ionising radiation, things like ultraviolet light from the sun. Now, when it comes to skin damage, this is one of the major sources, as you would know. And for lots of us, we don't have the same protection in the skin as some other groups do to their benefit. All right, so the greatest source of free radicals, as I said. So we've got a couple of sources, internal sources and external sources. The greatest free radicals actually come from the internal sources. Mostly this one, conversion of carbohydrates and fats into energy. If there's anybody in the audience who wants to take down the references for that and then look them up, I've just put a couple here just for you. There are many others, but then there's the immune system, as I mentioned, producing the immune cells. I'll look a little bit more about that later. But I wanted to mention this one here, sleep. Lack of sleep can alter the immune response and the oxidative stress levels. Now, we're told to get good rest. Now, Ellen White didn't know about this. None of our pioneers knew about how it affects the immune system and various other things. But what is interesting is that when you don't sleep well, your immune system doesn't seem to function as efficiently or as effectively, and it may overactivate. Now, there are ways in which we can take things in the diet and that sort of stuff that can either suppress or enhance the immune system. And things like omega-6 and omega-3s fit into that category. But lack of sleep is a common problem in a Western society where we are very anxious, we're very stressed, we've got things to do. So not only do we get shorter sleep, but we tend to get a reduced quality of sleep. And if we're not exercising on top of that, then it makes it even more difficult to sleep. I'll talk a little bit more about exercise shortly, but one of the really good things about exercise is that, and I heard in the Sabbath school here when people were talking about stress, and it's true, when you're stressed, you stimulate what's called the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, and you actually get this stress response produced from the adrenal glands, etc. And so you are activated, ready for doing something. However, for most of us, we feel activated, ready for doing something, and we stay sitting in front of the laptop or the computer or whatever else it is we're doing, and we just sit there. And then we get on the bus or get in the traffic and sit while we get stressed on the way home in the traffic. And then we get home, and of course, what do? Probably, I don't know, some of us maybe sit in front of the TV and get more concerned about the news or whatever else might be happening. But what we don't tend to do is go out and do some exercise. Exercise would reset that stress response, that hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis response. And so if we do that, then of course you're able to sleep a little bit better. That's able to help things like the immune system. We're still not sure of how all of that is related together, but it certainly makes a big difference. So getting adequate sleep is extremely important. And then this chronic anxiety stress. Chronic stimulation of the HPA axis, like I just talked about. So this is the stress response. Chronic activation of the stress response is going to increase because it increases the metabolism. I told you that the metabolism is actually what produces most free radicals. I'll show you a bit more later on. But that's what produces most of it. And if we're chronically stressed, we're going to be chronically activated. So it's only, the body's all ready to move, but it's like you've got your foot down on the accelerator all the time. It's good when you need to go fast, but if you have that for the whole day, you're going to do some damage to the engine. That's the same with what we're doing here. So increases inflammation, free radical production as a result of this increase in the HPA axis. I'll just mention, and I'm not going to really talk about caffeine at all this afternoon, but one of the interesting things is that caffeine stimulates the HPA axis. I mentioned that it affects the adenosine receptors, which is a bit beyond the scope of today, but it actually stimulates this stress response. And it's interesting that in a society where we're already stressed, that then we take something that makes us more stressed. I don't know that that's such a great idea. And as I mentioned to some people with teenagers who are now the number of teenagers that are actually having caffeinated drinks, whether or not it's V, Mother, Red Bull, whatever it might be, is increasing at an alarming rate. Taking a teenager who is already anxious about being anxious or anxious about being a teenager or whatever, now making them more stressed, is that a good thing? I don't think it'll be very helpful. And sadly, we've also got an increase in what seems to be a perceived increase in depression amongst adolescents. We're doing a study at the moment called Neurobiological Correlates of Depression, and it was interesting that with my colleagues, except for the ones that work with me, none of which are Adventist, and I said we need to be looking at caffeine amongst this group. Oh, why do we need to look at caffeine? What's that got to do with anything? And it wasn't until I was actually able to explain how it fits with the stress response, and knowing that anxiety is the greatest risk factor for the development of depression. So chronic anxiety underpins the development of depression. So if you're anxious and obviously stressed for a long period of time, depression is a logical progression. And of course, if you're increasing that by things like caffeine, it makes sense that that may be linked. We don't know whether it is yet. We're still doing that study. All right, I mentioned this other one, ages, back here. So foods we eat. Where do ages come from? Relatively new, and most people don't know too much about it. High levels of sugar will produce these things called advanced glycation end products. We know that if we take in more sugar, we're going to get more free radicals produced. I'll show you a bit more later on at a metabolic level. But not only that, if you have high sugar, and particularly if you have high levels of sugar at any one time, it's going to do a couple of things. One is it produces these AGEs, advanced glycation end products. The other thing is it causes things to become what's called glycosylated. Now, if we just put sugar up here on the bench somewhere, if somebody spilled a soft drink or whatever, and I touch it after a little while, what's it going to feel like? It'll feel sticky. So you can imagine if you've put that into the body and the blood glucose is kept high at different levels, you can imagine it's going to start to glycosylate a lot of the proteins. We can measure them in the laboratory. People do a test called HbA1c, or the glycosylated hemoglobin of a particular fraction. But it is, and it's not the only one that's done, it does it to a lot of things. And it makes them what? More sticky, which is why, particularly if people have already got some narrowing of arteries, some of their atherosclerotic disease, it can actually cause the platelets to stick together and plug up some of those things, which is why they can end up with poor circulation in the feet and toes, in the extremities, and eventually causing damage to different parts of the brain. Now, it's interesting that my wife works as a wound care specialist at the SAN, and she deals with patients who have got a history of diabetes, And they can come in, and these people have had wounds, particularly on the legs. I wouldn't show them to you, particularly after lunch. But some of these people have had wounds for a year, 2 years. They're just not healing. And I say to her, well, she says to me, wouldn't it be nice if we could get these people on a better diet? But these people already are diabetic and don't want to change. And so they just continue with poor blood flow to the extremities, so the wound isn't healing, so they continually end up with these infected, festering wounds. I can't give you more graphic detail. Just the smell of it is particularly terrible. But this is as a result of not only glycosylation, but also the development of these advanced glycation end products, which themselves will cause a production of free radicals. So they significantly increase free radical production, and free radicals do damage. So age is also formed during cooking as the result of the application of heat. I just took this off the website. I thought it was good. Deep frying for the brave. As I said to you, look, and I've eaten fried food. It's not something where I'm saying, don't go and have this or whatever. I'm just telling you what happens when you do, so that you know whether or not you should feel good or bad about what you're doing. All right, it's your choice. And something like, now this is not Coca-Cola, by the way. This is just called Killer Cola. So I'm not saying anything about any specific cola drink, but if there are cola drinks, which incidentally have 3 really bad things. The dark colour actually is very high in these things, so it's very high in ages. They're very high in sugar, and they're also very high in caffeine. Again, it's your choice, I don't mind, but it's my responsibility to tell you about them. So that's Killer Cola. That's nothing to do with any other thing that might sound the same. This is just to show you, this is a study that was, when was it published? 2005. But it's basically to show you that if you eat more ages, you end up with more ages in the body. I mean, that's what we would expect to see happen, but, people sometimes like to see the details. This is actually showing what happens in the tissue as we get older. So this CML is actually a type of age product, and it's just showing you that, and this is in the lens, so this is in the eye. What are one of the problems we get as people get older? Their vision tends to get a little bit more blurry. And this actually happens in the lens, and you can see that these ages increase in the lens. This is in the skin, and you can see that the skin accumulates it. Now, what's the trouble with accumulating ages? Now, this is the general population. It doesn't have to be that way. If you were, this age, there's no reason why you couldn't be down here. But this is what generally happens in a Western population because of the choices and things and the foods that they eat. So what happens? What do ages do? They increase free radical stress in the body. They increase protein cross-linking, which is what's happening to actually make the skin more stiff. If you've got a little baby's skin, it's nice and supple. It always springs back to where it should do. Unfortunately, as we get older, mine too, I'm a surfer, but it tends to cross-link, make it stiff, non-functional and hard to remove. So this is what happens in things like collagen. I just love this picture. I think obviously these two are closely related, but you can see the difference in skin. Now, there are considerable advantages to age, and the more I go along, the more I appreciate them, but it would still be nice if we didn't have to necessarily suffer from what we're seeing with some of these. And it accelerates things like atherosclerosis. One of the things I removed from here is some of the details as I went through the cause of cancer, the cause of atherosclerosis and dementia, because it would make it far too long. But it is interesting to see the specific details of how that actually increases those processes. So the more we have, the more chance we've got of, as I said, increasing aging in each of those tissues, which sets up these type of diseases with atherosclerosis and therefore heart disease and stroke. So, as I mentioned, free radicals also are produced by the immune system. So when you've got an injury or an infection, then the cells, white cells particularly, this is a macrophage and a neutrophil, they'll produce things like nitric oxide, superoxide, hydroxyl radical, another one superoxide, and the body will try and neutralize these using its own antioxidant system. I'll mention a little bit more later on, but things like vitamin E, vitamin C, glutathione, and catalase, superoxide dismutase, there's a few others that the body has. So it's a good thing that we need as surveillance around the body, but if inflammation is continuing and we have it set up as a chronic thing, then it's not good for us. Is that right? Because obviously it's doing collateral damage all the time, and it would be giving us damage which then we would have to try and repair using a lot of the body's resources which it might not have. This is just a technical slide showing that hepatitis significantly increases free radicals. This one's important. Now, I need to be very careful, well, not very careful, I just need to be clear here. All of us are actually made differently, and this is not a question about how much weight an individual person has. This is more to do with how quickly you're putting weight on. And yes, there is a capacity for all of us to have more weight than we should have. But some of us will be larger than others, naturally. But the problem is if we've got more weight than we should have, the body actually sets up, you won't be able to read a lot of this, unfortunately. This actually comes from a publication which I thought was very good, 2003, Journal of Clinical Investigation. Adipose tissue characterised by inflammation and progressive infiltration of, and this is macrophages, white cells. What happens when people are putting on weight? So we all have a normal amount of weight which we carry, and all of us are different. But when we start taking in too much energy in our food, it's got to get stored somewhere because the body doesn't know what else to do with it, so it turns it into triglyceride or fat and starts tucking it away. And it's got to tuck it away into this organ called the fat tissue, or adipose tissue is the other term for it. So it's tucking it away in there. Now you can imagine it's there and it's supposed to take, supposed to take 20 units. Okay, it gets to the 20 units. It starts actually sending signals back to your brain going, hey, I'm full, don't eat anymore, it's okay, I've got enough. I've got another slide in here which I've again left out for that, but it is interesting and it's telling you to stop. The trouble is that for various reasons, you're going, oh no, I like the taste of that, I'm going to have some more. I feel a little stressed, I actually need to have some more because I feel better. And so you keep eating. And so now the cell is going, oh, I'm only set up for 20, but now I'm getting 25, 30, 35. Do you think the cell's getting stressed? It's getting stressed. And that's why it starts to actually do damage to your fat cells. Now, the last thing you want to do is damage your fat cells because it starts setting up some signals which send out to the immune system to call the immune cells in to go, hey, look, I'm stressed, I'm damaged, you need to start sort of getting rid of some of this damaged tissue. And so the immune system comes in and sets up an inflammatory response within your fat tissue. So unfortunately, you set up a chronic inflammation. Is that a good thing? Do you think you're getting more free radicals? You absolutely are. Do you think that's contributing to the aging process? It absolutely is. So it's something to be very aware of. To me, I don't care what anybody looks like. That's not the point. But the point is it healthy or is it not healthy? If you're 100 kilograms and healthy, that's fantastic. But generally speaking, if you're putting on more weight than your body can handle, then that's unhealthy because you are setting up a chronic inflammation, which is not good. All right, so what diseases are caused by free radicals or this oxidative stress? Well, they're these ones. Cancer. Now notice, these are the top 5 diseases in Australia. And cancer and circulatory disease are the top 2. You can notice for men they're about equal. For women, the heart disease and stroke are a little bit more than cancer. Then you've got chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, which is inverted to dementia in the men and women, but the same top 5 for both. Chronic obstructive pulmonary disease is mostly caused, this is emphysema, lung diseases, which is caused mostly by people smoking. We probably don't have too much of an issue with that. It does have with their significant industrial pollution as well. Dementia is one which is worrying people more. Now it's 3% at this stage. These statistics are taken from 2006. But dementia is likely to increase as a percentage of population as our population ages. And it is significantly increasing as a result of our demographic at the moment. So dementia will significantly increase, and then diabetes 1 and 2. All of these diseases, all of them, are significantly affected by lifestyle. So if you've got a good lifestyle, your risk of developing these decreases significantly. If you don't, they increase significantly. This was just to show where they came from. Basically, one of the immune activation, chronic inflammation, you've got oxidative stress, which causes a physiological dysfunction, which you get selected cell death and then irreparable DNA damage. It's that irreparable DNA damage particularly that links to things like cancer and dementia. It's also this one too, but these two particularly, which is what a lot of older people are worried about. Will I get cancer? Am I going to lose some of my ability to think and reason? And they can be stopped, or at least they can be minimised by the sort of lifestyle that you live. So, summarising, this is coming to the end of session 1. And I said I was going to try and finish 2 sessions in 1 hour. So, free radicals are rogue chemicals produced mainly by the body, but can originate from the diet. Free radicals cause damage to cells and other organs. Accumulated damage by free radicals lead to diseases such as heart disease, cancer, and dementia. Now, if it's okay with you, we'll just take a couple of questions before we go on what can we do about it. Is that all right? So has that been relatively as an overview? Any questions in there? Yeah? Yeah, there are, and there are a number of others that cause. I mean, there is suicides, which fit in there quite significantly as well. I haven't actually pulled out some of the others, but yes. I just wanted to pull out the top 5, particularly, and it's instructive that the top 5 are all lifestyle-related diseases. Yeah. Yeah, now what I said that carbohydrates, the conversion of carbohydrates and fats into energy produces most of the free radicals. Now I'll talk about that a little bit later on. It's not saying that carbohydrates and fats are free radicals, they're not. But when they're converted, if we've got lots of them, they'll cause more of it. That'll be clearer in the next session. Yeah, that's a good question. Depending on what the cause is, so if there is a strong inherited link, all cancer really is, it sounds almost trivial if I say that, I'll just show you, there's a couple of ones on cancer here. In order to get a cancer, what a cancer is a cell which is no longer able to listen to the cells around it. So we talked about before, you know, if you rub your hand, you lose some cells, you've got to grow some more. So in order for that to happen, the cells only want to grow as much as actually what it needs to fill the space that it needed to fill. If it doesn't listen to the cells around it, and they send little chemicals backwards and forwards and go, no, you've had enough, yeah, no, well, we've got enough, that's it. Right? And they do the same sort of thing with the liver and everything else. Now, when they're no longer able to listen to the chemical communication of the cells around them, then they can become a cancerous cell which just keeps dividing and dividing. I know that there's a theory, and it's a common theory which is within the medical community, is that cancers are themselves rogue things that almost have a desire to go out and damage things. I don't believe that's true at all. I think they're a poor little deaf, dumb and blind cell which isn't able to listen to anybody, so it's doing the only thing it knows how to do, and that is divide, because it can't hear anybody telling it shouldn't. Now, to produce a cancer, keeping that in mind, the cancer has got to be produced by damaging the information within the nucleus that produces proteins in the cell, etc., and that's where its ears are. That's how it listens, by having those proteins activated, etc. So the nucleus is telling, okay, you've got to produce this protein, get it out there. If you damage that part of the nucleus and then no longer produce that protein, then it won't be able to hear. Now, that damage, again, free radicals will cause that damage, and that seems to be the major production. So when that damage happens, you've got to either repair it or you've got to kill the cell. Now, I'm getting still to your question, which says, can it be inherited? The damage generally won't be inherited, but what may be there is a reduced capacity of being able to deal with the free radical activity itself. So that probably is it, in which case, if you're more careful with the lifestyle, you're going to reduce the chance. It's a little bit like saying, so with me, with light skin, I like surfing, so I'll go out and surf. Now, when I do, I make sure that I put sunscreen on. Whereas a friend of mine, who actually has a Solomon Islander background, when he goes out into the sun, he doesn't need to take the same precautions as me. You could say that I'm genetically predisposed to getting skin cancer, but I can modify my lifestyle so that I'm at no more risk than he is. Can you see? And it can be the same sort of thing with other organs. So lifestyle can either increase or decrease the risk. Yeah. She uses the term virus in relation to cancers, and she's quite accurate that there are certain viruses, papillomavirus for example, which is why we have one of our recent scientists of the year getting awards for his development of a vaccine. And this is actually caused by papillomavirus, which can then cause things like uterine cancer, etc.
Does that mean that the virus damages the cell?
Yes. That's right, and generally what will happen, the virus can work in a couple of different ways. It can either insert itself into the genome, which itself can actually prevent certain things from, certain genes from being expressed, and therefore making our deaf, dumb and blind cell, or it can set up a local inflammatory reaction, which is what I think mostly happens, although I can be corrected on that, and a local inflammatory reaction which will then cause the damage to the tissue by free radicals from the immune system, which will then cause the cancer. That's the same sort of thing that can happen with chronic throat infections, for example. Same sort of thing, it might be a viral infection that starts it off through chronic infection, and then of course you get the immune response, which will cause the DNA damage. Yeah, that's a very good question, and maybe even when I talk about it a little bit more later on, that might be a little bit clearer. My personal response to that is the whole system is really quite complex, and in order to get, so if you take vitamin E for example, vitamin E is a fat-soluble vitamin, so it won't get into the areas which are mostly aqueous, and the body's really set up between two most important compartments. One is what we call a fatty compartment or a lipophilic compartment, the other is an aqueous. So anywhere in the blood and the interstitial fluid is all sort of aqueous, it's water-based. But cell membranes and various other tissues are actually fat-based. So you need to have things that are going to get at the right concentrations in at the right levels. There's one other important thing with vitamins and taking anything in large amounts is that if you take too much vitamin C, for example, that can become a pro-oxidant. So it can actually become a free radical. So it's, I know we have a Nobel Prize winner from the, I think the late 50s or 60s who he won 2 Nobel Prizes, but was telling everybody that you should take mega doses of vitamin C. Well, he's wrong. I think we need to be very careful, and again, it's sort of coming back to that balanced view and recognising that we've been given a whole variety of different things which can combat different compartments, get into different areas in the right concentrations. So mega dose of anything I think is probably not good. Making sure we've got a diet which can supply an adequate supply of everything I think is great. Recognising we may have a nutrient deficient diet for various reasons because of mass production and whatever. Taking supplementation with key things is probably not a bad idea, but not overdoing it. That's sort of given a perspective. All right. Okay, is there any other questions on this bit here? Yeah?
On the whole antioxidant thing, there's a claim that certain foods are superfoods,
Oh, yes.
and that if you increase the consumption of those, maybe for example blueberries or whatnot, that they have especially high amounts of these antioxidants. Is that actually true? I mean, my understanding is that numerous foods have got antioxidant qualities and properties in them.
Mm.
But is it really true that these foods are superfoods?
Yeah. And it depends on the where. I think that there are good foods, and I think certainly the dark fruits and veggies are definitely a great way to go. Some recent research by our own group has shown one of these molecules that come from the dark fruits does something which is more than just an antioxidant. It actually stimulates an enzyme which produces more of another product which improves DNA repair and stimulates what's called the longevity genes, as well as improving efficiency of energy production. So there's no doubt that there are some key things. What I find is interesting and what balances me. Now, my colleagues who aren't Adventist and don't really have a sense of health get very excited and in fact are supplementing their sports drinks with it. I chose not to, even though we did a big experiment on ourselves and took mega doses, and showed some very positive biochemical reactions. I chose not to because I think we've got a system which, when you look at where it's been put in nature, believing, of course, that we were designed in cooperation, or at least designed to have what nature gives us, it's never in those high concentrations. So there may be a negative to the end of it, although in an acute situation it might be of benefit. So yes, I think they're foods that are very good. Yes, there's some really exciting things that some of these foods have and can do metabolically to the body in a really positive way, but I would never get too excited about jumping in and only having kale or whatever the latest superfood is.
The one thing is that when they actually make statements like that, they never ever say, for a female this old, we need 2 cups of this or 4 cups of that sort of thing, or,
Yes.
half a gram.
Yes.
For a male to do this, they just say, oh, it's good to have more of this.
Yes.
They don't actually state how to do it, do they?
Yeah, and that's very true.
It's a really deceptive way of doing it.
And unfortunately still marketing, and that's where I get a bit concerned as well. And I agree with you with, in a sense, saying how much should we produce, particularly for an older population. I think that the nutrition needs to improve as you get older, and generally it gets less because you don't have the children to cook for and all of that sort of thing. And yet there's very real reasons why. If I get a chance, I'll talk about some latest research we've done on young versus old animals and actually just what happens in the brain and that sort of stuff as well, also related to this. But I thought I'd better start session 2, recognising that I've got 10 minutes before the hour, probably 20 minutes, we started 10 past.